Last Tuesday at Denver International, my grandmother was publicly humiliated by a stranger who ripped her boarding pass in half and mocked her for moving too slow, while a crowd of travelers stood frozen in discomfort. The woman's smug smile told me she'd done this before, that she'd perfected the art of cruelty disguised as impatience. The woman thought she was untouchable. She had no idea that the frail elderly woman she was humiliating had raised the grandson now standing behind her. By the time I made one phone call, her smug grin vanished. Hello, I'm Marcus Thompson, the one sharing this story today. The early morning terminal hummed with that peculiar energy. Airports always carry a blend of exhaustion, anticipation, and barely concealed impatience. I'd been traveling for work, 3 grinding days of back-to-back negotiations in Seattle that left me hollow-eyed and craving nothing more than my own bed. My flight had just landed, and I was mentally calculating how quickly I could navigate baggage claim when I heard it. That voice, sharp, cutting, unmistakable in its cruelty, it sliced through the ambient noise like a blade, making heads turn instinctively. I followed the sound before I even processed what I was doing, weaving through clusters of travelers until the scene came into focus under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. A heavy-set woman stood over someone seated in one of those uncomfortable airport chairs, her denim jacket stretched tight across her shoulders as she gestured wildly. Brown hair swung around her face with each aggressive movement. But it was the person in the chair that made my blood turn cold. Nana, my grandmother, 87 years old, barely 5 feet tall, hands folded around her purse strap with that gentle dignity she'd carried her entire life. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. The woman I'd later learn her name was Linda was holding something above Nana's head, shaking it like a trophy. It took me a second to recognize the torn pieces of what used to be a boarding pass, deliberately ripped, cleanly destroyed. My chest tightened so fast I nearly stumbled. I pushed forward, my carry-on forgotten somewhere behind me. The closer I got, the clearer Linda's words became. Maybe if you moved faster, you wouldn't cause problems for everyone else, she sneered, loud enough that a small crowd had begun to form. Nana's expression, that's what broke me. Confusion, mixed with embarrassment, as though she genuinely believed she'd done something wrong. She'd raised me after my mother passed when I was 12, taught me patience when I had none, kindness when the world felt cruel, strength that didn't require volume. Seeing her reduced to this fragile, apologetic figure beneath someone's manufactured rage felt like watching something sacred get trampled. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Linda's head snapped toward me, her glare transferring seamlessly. "Your little old lady here thought she could skip the line," she announced, as if I'd asked for a recap. Her tone dripped with self-righteousness. I crouched beside Nana, scanning her face for injury or distress beyond the emotional kind. "Are you hurt?" I asked softly. She shook her head, but her hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to cause a fuss." The apology shattered something inside me. I gathered the torn boarding pass pieces from the floor, noting the intentional tear straight through the barcode. This wasn't accidental. This was vindictive. I stood slowly, holding the evidence, and met Linda's eyes. "You destroyed her ticket. It wasn't a question." She crossed her arms, a smug smile creeping across her face. She earned it. Maybe teach her some manners. The audacity was almost surreal. Around us, passengers shifted uncomfortably, phones beginning to rise. I noticed a gate agent nearby, young and visibly torn between intervening and disappearing. "Can you help us?" I called to him, keeping my tone measured. Before he could respond, Linda barked, "Don't you dare take their side. I'll have your job if you mess this up for me." The threat worked. The agent froze, caught between protocols and self-preservation. I felt that familiar adrenaline spike, the kind that makes your hand shake if you don't control it. But I'd learned control young, learned it from Nana herself during those early grief-stricken years. I turned back to her, kneeling again. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said firmly. "I promise you, this gets fixed." She nodded, trusting me completely, though worry still clouded her eyes. That trust felt like both a gift and a weight. I couldn't let her down. Not here. Not like this. I rose and faced Linda directly, giving her one last opportunity I knew she wouldn't take. "Walk away now," I said quietly. "Let me handle this without making it worse for you." She laughed. Ugly. Mocking sound. "What are you going to do? Cry to management?" She leaned in slightly, performing for the growing audience. People like her slow everyone down. I just sped things up. That's when I made my decision. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a number I rarely used, one reserved for emergencies and situations exactly like this. Linda's expression shifted slightly, suspicion creeping in beneath the arrogance. "What are you doing?" she demanded. I didn't answer. The line connected quickly, and I stepped back just enough to speak clearly. "This is Marcus Thompson. Authorization code Delta 739er. I need immediate assistance at gate C42. Priority family matter involving destroyed documentation and passenger harassment." The response was immediate and professional. Someone was already being dispatched. When I hung up, Linda was staring at me with narrowed eyes. "Trying to scare me with a phone call?" she sneered, though her voice had lost a fraction of its earlier confidence. I ignored her, returning to Nana's side. "Help's coming," I told her softly. "Just breathe." She nodded, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. The crowd around us had thickened, phones still recording, whispers spreading. An airport supervisor arrived, clipboard clutched defensively, and attempted to take control of the situation. He asked Linda to explain her version of events, and she launched into an elaborate performance. She painted herself as the victim of an aggressive elderly woman and her hostile grandson, embellishing every detail with theatrical outrage. I let her talk, let her dig deeper. When she finally finished, breathless with indignation, I simply handed the supervisor the torn boarding pass. He examined it with a grimace. The tear was unmistakably intentional. Before he could speak, 2 passengers stepped forward hesitantly. "We saw what happened," one said, holding up his phone. "Got part of it recorded." The video showed Linda ripping the ticket cleanly in half, then towering over Nana with aggressive body language. Linda's face paled, then flushed red. "You can't film me without permission," she snapped. The supervisor ignored her protest, focusing instead on the practical problem. He checked the system for rebooking options, but the next available flight wouldn't depart until the following morning. Too late. Nana's medical appointment was this afternoon, non-negotiable. Linda smirked triumphantly, misreading the moment entirely. "Looks like you're out of luck," she said to me. Should have taught her patience. I felt something crystallize inside me, cold and certain. The help I'd called for was coming. I just needed to hold the line until it arrived. But the situation continued deteriorating. More passengers began filming, creating additional pressure. Linda tried to swat at one phone, sparking a brief commotion that drew even more attention. The supervisor called for security, his voice betraying how overwhelmed he felt. When security arrived, Linda shifted tactics instantly. She began crying loudly, manufacturing distress with practiced ease. "I'm being harassed," she wailed. "They're targeting me because I stood up for myself." Security remained cautious, asking her to step aside so they could sort through the facts. She refused, claiming she didn't feel safe. The tension in the terminal ratcheted higher, a spectacle forming whether anyone wanted it or not. Then the atmosphere changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in staff posture, a hush spreading through bystanders. A man in a sharply pressed uniform approached, accompanied by 2 personnel wearing badges that identified them as Airline Operations Management. They moved with swift purpose, eyes locked on me. The supervisor straightened immediately, relief flooding his features. "Mr. Thompson," the uniformed man said when he reached me. His tone carried both respect and urgency. Linda's eyes widened. "Wait, you know him?" The man ignored her, addressing me directly. "We received your call. I've reviewed the authorization personally. How can we assist?" I nodded toward Nana. "She needs her flight restored immediately. Priority accommodation." He didn't hesitate. Full override. Move now. His team sprang into action with military efficiency. Linda blinked rapidly, confusion and fear finally breaking through her arrogance. "What's going on? Why are you listening to him?" The operations manager finally looked at her, his expression cold. "Ma'am, we're addressing a serious violation of airline policy and passenger safety." Security gestured for Linda to follow them to a private room for questioning. She resisted, voice rising again with accusations that now sounded hollow even to her, but the energy had shifted completely. Every protest only highlighted her guilt. The operations team worked efficiently around Nana, treating her with care and professionalism that contrasted sharply with Linda's earlier cruelty. They reissued her boarding pass instantly, bypassing standard protocols, upgrading her to first class with medical accommodations. Nana seemed overwhelmed, murmuring soft thanks as they guided her gently. I stayed close, ensuring she felt steady both physically and emotionally. As Linda was escorted toward the security office, she made one last desperate attempt. "Tell them the truth," she shouted at me. "Tell them she started it." I met her eyes evenly. "You destroyed her ticket," I said calmly. "You humiliated an elderly woman. Now you're dealing with the consequences." My voice carried no malice, just the steady weight of fact. Her face contorted, caught between fury and panic as the officers led her away. Her protest dissolved into incoherent frustration that faded behind closing doors. With Linda gone, the terminal seemed to exhale collectively. The operations team finalized Nana's boarding arrangements, guiding her toward the jet bridge with the care reserved for VIPs. I walked beside her until we reached the entrance. She paused, holding my hand with surprising firmness. "You always take care of me," she whispered. I felt warmth spread through my chest, softening every hard edge of the last hour. "Always," I replied. She boarded slowly but confidently, and I watched her move toward the first-class cabin. Passengers who'd witnessed the confrontation nodded respectfully. As she passed small gestures of solidarity, she returned with gentle smiles. The gate agent closed the door once she was seated, and the aircraft began its pre-flight preparations. I stood alone for a moment, letting the remaining tension drain from my shoulders. Nearby, passengers debated what they'd witnessed, their conversations punctuated by notification buzzes as videos spread across social media. I didn't need to monitor it. The truth would travel on its own. Behind me, I heard the operations manager approaching. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, "security will likely pursue formal charges." Her behavior violated multiple federal regulations regarding passenger conduct and interference with airline operations. "We'll keep you informed." I thanked him, appreciating the professionalism. As I finally turned to leave, heading toward baggage claim to retrieve what I'd abandoned earlier, one thought settled clearly in my mind. Justice doesn't always require theatrics. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed as consequence, and lands exactly where it belongs.